Good morning, class. I am your subject teacher for microbiology and parasitology. Today, I will be discussing what nematodes are all about. But before that, I would like to give a brief background on its various nematodes infections based on the primary site of infection, the infective stage, the source of infection, mode of transmission, characteristic manifestation, and of course, complications through watching some YouTube videos. So to start, I will present first the primary site of infection.
Hey there, it's your student nurse Jay. Welcome back to my channel. So for today's video, I will be talking about characteristic manifestation of nematodes parasite. So first we have lumbricoids. Ascaris lumbricoid. Ascaris lumbricoid is one of the most largest common human intestinal roundworm in nematode infection. Lumbricoid is a widespread but is most common in tropics, in areas with poor sanitation, and where human feces is used as fertilizer. A lumbricoid infection can cause bloody sputum, cough, fever, wheezing, anorexia, abdominal pain, swelling, intestinal ulcer, and in children may experience agitation, sleeping difficulties, malnutrition, bloating, intermittent diarrhea, and even growth problems. Number 2, we have Trichirius trichiura. Trichirius trichiura is a gastrointestinal nematode with a long, thin anterior in the end that lies in the host mucosa and a thicker end that extends into the intestinal lumen. So the worm are white in color and range in length from 30 to 50 millimeter when viewed in vitro. So the male worm, which is smaller than the female, has a coiled posterior end. The infection can be transmitted by contact with contaminated soil, eating unwashed or peeled vegetable, fruit, plant, or encountering infected people's stool, or touching it without washing. It can result in a frequent anemia, abdominal discomfort, and even slow growth in children. Number 3, we have Strongyloides stercoralis. Infection caused by stercoralis can be symptomless. However, some symptoms may appear over time, such as dermatitis like swelling, itching, larva occurrence, mild hemorrhage at the infected area of the skin, the spontaneous scratch-like lesions, or a burning sensation in the chest, wheezing, vomiting, coughing, or pneumonia-like symptoms, tissue damage, sepsis, ulcer, or constipation. Fourth is the hookworms. So the infected person can't detect any symptoms when they come in contact at first, but they will feel the symptoms once the larvae reach the host intestines, and itching skin-like rash are the first symptoms. So the second symptoms are abdominal pain, diarrhea, loss of appetite, anemia and protein deficiency, fatigue, weight loss, fever in blood stool, coughing, and wheezing. So these are the common symptoms of a severe infection, and also children physically and cognitively development may be hampered. So fifth is the Trichinella spiralis. So for mild moderate cases infection, signs and symptoms are exhaustion, weakness, muscle ache, nausea, vomiting and diarrhea. It could last for a month. Headache, fever, chills, cough, facial and eye swelling, aching joints and muscle pain. So usually the first symptoms are itchy skin and diarrhea and constipation. But for severe infection, coordination problem, heart problem and breathing difficulties, light sensitivity, eye infection and headache, and even death are possible. So the sixth is the Wuchereria bancrofti. So the infection is visible. Asymptomatic sign and symptoms are most noticeable. Symptoms, however, are lymphedema, elephantiasis, and hydrocele, fever, chill, skin infection, painful lymph nodes, and tender skin of the lymphadenotio. Also, breast and genital organ involvement is expected, as well as body deformities and scar formation in affected area. Seventh is the Capillaria philippiensis. So, pain in the abdomen, reoccurring diarrhea, degeneration of the mucosa and submucosa, weight loss, weakness, anorexia, emaciation, nausea, vomiting, loss of proteins and electrolytes, malabsorption of fats and sugar, swelling of body, muscle wasting, and death may occur within 2 weeks if the parasite population grows. Lastly is Brogia malai. So the same as Wuchereria bancrofti, it is transmitted through mosquito bites, particularly Masonia and Anopheles and Aedes mosquitoes. So the symptoms are fever, coughing, wheezing, fatigue, anorexia, weight loss, and dyspnea. It is also includes lymphatic swelling and inflammation, as well as secondary bacterial infection.
So this is Shai, your parasite expert for today. So let's start! So for today, ang ating pag-aaralan ay tungkol sa mga nematodes, or kung saan nga ba namamalagi, or kung saan nga ba ang primary infection ng mga parasites na ito.
Nematodes are part of the phylum Nematoda and are a type of parasitic species.
Which means, hindi sila mabubuhay ng walang pineperwisyo, walang ginagambala at walang sinisipsipan. So, hindi ito yung kapitbahay nyo ha, pero parang ganun na nga, char lang. So, these animals are also called roundworms and one of the most abundant animals on earth.
Visible lang sila sa naked eye if they are in their adult form.
Meaning, hindi mo rin agad makikita or malalaman if you're infected with the parasitic infection since their eggs are not visible with the naked eye unless lumabas na yung signs and yung symptoms. So, the question remains,
Where are the nematodes' primary site of infection?
usually when humans became a host of these parasites, the common areas in which they hatch or produce their eggs are the alimentary, circulatory, and also the respiratory systems.
Alimentary, the parts of our body in which food and liquid go, pass, and are eliminated. For example, our fecal oral route. Once we touch something that is contaminated with their eggs or where the adult worm itself lives, for example, yung contaminated na soil and water or yung mga pagkain na kinakain natin, then pagkatapos nun is hindi tayo nag-wash ng hands or nag-sterilize, doon na mag-i-start yung infection.
Nangyayari ay ipapaliwanag muna natin kung saan pumapasok yung parasites na nematodes. So, first is yung A. lumbricoides and yung T. trichura. So, yung T. trichura and A. lumbricoides is makakonsider natin as soil helminths. Meaning, pwede natin siyang makuha sa contaminated soil. So, through this, pwede natin siyang through touch, which is sa kamay natin or sa feet. And once na isinubo natin yung kamay natin na contaminated with this soil helminths nga na nematodes, is pupunta na siya sa oral root or sa mouth natin. And upon ingestion of those eggs, sa mouth natin is magta-travel siya papunta sa intestines, since yung soil helminths is hindi siya nag-hatch sa external environment. So, kailangan nilang maghanap ng environment na pwede silang mag-produce ng eggs, which is dito sa intestines natin. And once na magparami sila dyan, and mag-produce sila ng eggs, is pwede na silang pumunta sa iba't ibang parts ng body natin, which is pwede silang pumunta sa lungs natin, sa liver, pwede rin sa stomach, and pwede rin silang lumabas again through our mouth. So, on the other hand, yung ibang type naman ng nematodes is yung hookworm, yung A. duodenale, and yung N. americanus. Ang ginagawa naman nila is they hatch their eggs externally. Meaning, for example, meron na dyang contaminated soil, so meron na dyang mga eggs, and also yung mga adult worm, and kapag nagkaroon tayo ng contact with that, sa hand natin, sa feet, and magpe-penetrate siya sa feet natin and sa hands natin. So, yung adult worm is may papasok na sa blood vessels natin and mag-travel sa blood flow, kasabay ng blood flow, and in more closer look, kapag pumasok na siya sa skin natin and nag-penetrate, pupunta na siya diretso sa intestines natin to lay their eggs there. And katulad nung kanina is, pagkatapos nilang mag-lay ng eggs, is i-infect na nila yung other body parts ulit, and doon na mag-i-start yung pinaka-infection. So, another example naman is yung S. stercoralis. Ang nangyayari naman dito is, nagpe-penetrate din sila sa skin natin. Pero, hindi katulad nung dalawang type na nauna kanina, na nagpupunta muna sa intestines natin. Ito naman is, dumediretso na sila sa lungs. So, yan yung S. stercoralis. Dumediretso na sila sa lungs, and doon nagiging pathenogenic female worm sila. So, pagkatapos nun is pupunta na sila sa intestines natin, and then magpaparami sila doon. Pupunta na ulit sila sa iba't ibang body parts natin para mag-infect.
The reason why nematodes mostly attack the skin, intestine, or the gastrointestinal tracts, circulatory system, the muscle, and the respiratory system is because this parasite derive their energy from glucose. Ninanakawan nila tayo ng glycogen na usually nakastore sa mga places na nabanggit. Ninanakawan din tayo nila ng blood and ng protein. The main reason why prominent ang anemia and protein deficiency wherever there are parasitic infections. Ito rin yung rason bakit tayo pumapayat. Kinukuhanan nila tayo ng taba and ng nutrients. Kaya dapat talaga mag-ingat tayo sa mga magnanakaw. Kita nyo naman, ikamamatay natin yan. Charis!
So, summarizing everything, ang dapat nating tandaan na primary site of infection nila ay ang sucker.
Hoy, anong sucker ang nasa isip mo, kapatid? Iba yun, ha? Sucker means skin, alimentary tracts, circulatory system, and respiratory system.
So that's it for today's video. Sana marami kayong natutunan about parasites or specifically sa mga nematodes. So this has been your parasite experts. Till the next video, Shies! Bye!
Good day guys and welcome back to my channel, and for today's video we'll be now talking about nematodes. So at the end of the laboratory period, we should be able to differentiate the various nematodes infections based on their source of infection. But before that, let us define first what the source of infection is. So for the definition, the source of infection is the place where a host gets an infection, whether it is endogenous, example given from the person's own commensal microbial flora, or exogenous, example given from somewhere else, or an individual, animal, or object that in the external environment of the host. The source is usually identified as a person, animal, or item in a given location and at a specific time. As a result, a person might be a source of infection either for himself or for others, or indigenous, or directly through personal contact, or indirectly, example given by contaminating food or beverages. Second, animals, in addition to people, can be sources of infection as well. Third, food, water, air conditioning systems, showers, medical devices, recreational waters, doorknobs, cotton handkerchiefs, and other objects can all be sources of infection. So most man-made objects that could be sources of illness must be manufactured with the lowest possible risk of contamination. The following are potential causes of nematode infections. First, consumption of mature eggs in feces, contaminated food, or beverages. Second, skin invasion by larvae, just like hookworms and S. stercoralis. Third, arthropod vector introduces larvae into the human host, like mosquitoes for filariasis and flies for ovolvulus and Dirofilaria species. Fourth, ingestion of raw or undercooked fish, cephalopods, or raw or undercooked snails or slugs contaminated with third-degree larvae, just like Anisakiasis or Angiostrongylliasis or rat lungworm disease. Next, humans get the virus also in a way by eating infected food or drinking contaminated water. The eggs hatch in the small intestine and release larvae that enter the intestine and travel to the lungs a few days later. They ascend the tracheobronchial tree, get swallowed, and then return to the intestines to mature into adult worms during the next week or two. So we can see in this figure 3 in the next following slides. Adult worms live for 1 to 2 years and begin producing eggs 2 months after infection. A single adult female worm can lay over 200,000 eggs every day. Next, here we have some examples with corresponding pictures. First, we have adult A. lumbricoids worm. Second, we have the lumbricoids egg. Third, we have the Ascaris life cycle. So all of this are courtesy from the Division of Parasitic Diseases or CDC. So that's it. Thank you for watching and have a great day ahead. Also, don't hesitate to ask questions.
Good day everyone, I am MARILYN TUGADE, and today I will be discussing to you about the infective stage and the mode of transmission of nematodes. But to further understand these two concepts, let me define them first for you. So, infective stage is the stage in the life cycle at which the parasite is able to initiate an infection to its host. Meanwhile, the route or method of transmission by which the infectious microbe moves or is transferred from one place to another to reach the new host is known as the mode or the means of transmission, which could be through ingestion, penetration of skin, inhalation of infected dust, and by blood-sucking insects. So let us start with Ascaris lumbricoides. So the eggs are not segmented and pass through the intestines and embryonate in wet, warm, and shady soil. And an infective larva grows within the egg in around 3 weeks. So after being ingested by a human, the eggs travel through the human intestine and hatch in the duodenum. The discharged larvae then enter the intestinal mucosa, lymphatic and portal systems, and are taken to the liver, heart, and lungs. So this migratory phase takes a few days to complete. Then next, the larvae break loose from the capillaries and enter the alveoli, passing through the respiratory tree before being ingested. They enter the intestines and keep developing, becoming sexually mature adults 8 to 12 weeks after infection. The adults survive for about a year before passing through the feces. So next is the Trichuris trichura. So after around 2 to 4 weeks on soil, eggs shed in the feces become infective under the right conditions, which are wet and shaded. So after a human consumes infected eggs, larvae emerge and migrate to the cecum, where they mature, attach in the epithelium, and become adults. So adults live for 1 to 3 years after ovulation, begins 2 to 3 months after infection. So female worms have the ability to lay up to 20,000 eggs per day. So the third one is the Strongyloides trichoralis. So adult soil-dwelling worm lay eggs which hatch into non-infection rhabditiform larvae. These either mature into adults or become infective filariform larvae, continuing the free-living cycle. Filariform larvae can penetrate through healthy human skin and travel to the lungs. They are then expectorated, ingested, and transported to the small intestine, which takes 3 to 4 weeks. Strongyloides trichoralis grows into adult worms in the colon, produces eggs, and hatches into rhabditiform larvae. Although the majority of these larvae leave the gastrointestinal tract via the bowel and grow into adult worms in the soil, a small percentage become infective or filariform larvae inside the gut and enter the intestinal mucosa or perianal skin, accomplishing the life cycle without leaving the host, including undefined persistence in the absence of treatment, proliferation in the absence of external reinfection, and possible person-to-person propagation. So the next one are the hookworms. As with the other soil-transmitted helminths, eggs excreted in the stool of infected people must develop on soil, preferably warm, moist, and shady as usual, where they hatch into larvae within 1 to 2 days. So after molting for 5 to 10 days, the larvae become infectious. Larvae enter the body after coming into contact with human skin and are taken to the lungs. They then migrate to the small intestine after moving up to the crea and being swallowed. Females begin laying eggs 4 to 6 weeks after infection. Also, it can be transferred through person to person with fecal-oral contamination of hands, as well as sexual transmission and fomites like bedding. The cycle is then continued by the larvae emerging from the ingested eggs, traveling to the ileocecal area and molting into adults. Next one is the Capillara philippinensis. It has a 2 life cycle which comprises both direct and indirect cycles. The disease is thought to circulate naturally between fish and piscivorous or fish-eating birds. So humans get affected after consuming undercooked or raw fish containing pathogenic C. philippinensis larvae. In the small intestine, larvae develop into adults. Females of the first generation release larvae after mating, which attacks the host intestinal epithelium and develop into second generation adults. Almost all of the second generation females will release eggs after mating, but others will continue to release larvae, resulting in autoinfection. The autoinfection process causes the host to get infected infected for a long time, eventually progressing to hyperinfection. Then the next one is the Trichinea spiralis, wherein the enteral phase of the parasite life cycle begins when meat-carrying infective third-stage larvae is consumed. An infected mosquito transmits third-stage filarial larvae onto the skin of the human host during a blood meal where they penetrate the bite hole. After the encapsulated cyst wall is digested in the acid pepsin environment of the stomach, larvae of about 1 millimeter in length are released. These larvae go quickly to the small intestine lumen where they parasitize columnar epithelial cells. 4 molts take place over the course of 10 to 28 hours, resulting in the production of mature adult female and male worms in the small intestinal epithelium. Fecund female worms develop and produce first stage or the newborn larvae that enter the lymphatic system and subsequently the blood circulation via the thoracic duct, triggering the systemic phase of infection. Newborn larvae are then disseminated throughout the body in capillary beds and eventually parasitize treated muscle cells. The larvae molt, insist, and mature into infective third-stage larvae and 15 days after entering muscle. Lastly, mosquitoes from the genera Mansonia and Aedes are the most common vectors of Wuchereria bronchiophthi and Brugia malayi filariasis. An infected mosquito transmits third-stage filarial larvae onto the skin of the human host during a blood meal where they infiltrate the bite hole. They mature into adults who normally reside in the lymphatic system. The microfilariae travel via the lymphatic system and into the bloodstream, eventually reaching the peripheral circulation. So during a blood meal, a mosquito consumes microfilariae where they lose their sheaths after ingestion and pass through the proventriculus wall and the cardiac section of the midgut, reaching the thoracic muscles. Microfilariae evolve into first-stage larvae and then third-stage larvae in this environment. When the mosquito gets a blood meal, the third-stage larvae travel through the hemocoel to the proboscis and can attack another human. So that is all for my discussion of the infective stage and mode of transmission of nematodes. I hope you learned a lot and thank you for listening.
Good day! For today, we will talk about the potential complications of nematode infections which are allowed by the way. But don't worry because we will only focus on a few of them. Nonetheless, the infection are as follows. As you can see, there are indeed lots of complications for the reason that many roundworm species are free living in nature. Furthermore, recent data have demonstrated that approximately 60 species of roundworms parasitize humans, and according to a 2005 report by the World Health Organization or WHO, approximately 0.807 to 1.221 billion humans have ascariasis, while 604 to 795 million have trichoriasis, and 576 to 740 million have hookworm infections worldwide. With that being said, we will only focus with the common complications of nematode in humans, and these are the ascariasis, trichoriasis, hookworm, and enterobiasis. Starting with ascariasis, so ascariasis is an intestinal parasite of humans. It is the most common human worm infection. In here, the larvae and the adult worms live in the small intestine and can cause intestinal disease. However, the main question in here is what are the potentially dangerous complications? So for those people who are infected with ascaris often show no symptoms. But if symptoms do occur, they can be light, which includes abdominal discomfort, while heavy infections can cause loss of appetite and poor absorption of digested foods. That is why children with ascariasis are at risk of not getting enough nutrition, which can slow the growth. The next complication is intestinal blockage and perforation. In heavy ascariasis infestation, a mass of worms can block a portion of the intestine. This can cause severe abdominal cramping and vomiting. Then, the blockage can even make a hole in the intestinal wall or appendix, causing internal bleeding or hemorrhage, as well as appendicitis, of course. Lastly, the duct blockages. In some cases, worms may also block the narrow ducts of the liver or pancreas, causing severe pain. So, healthcare providers can diagnose ascariasis by taking a stool sample and using a microscope to look for the presence of eggs. The high-risk groups for soil-transmitted helminth infections identified by the World Health Organization again are preschool or school-aged children, women of childbearing, including pregnant women in the second and third trimesters, and also those lactating women. For the treatment, usually only those that cause symptoms need to be treated, and in some cases, ascariasis resolves on its own. But if not, anthelmintic medications, which are drugs that get rid of parasitic worms, are the first line of treatment. Examples of these drugs are benzosole, ivermectin, and bebendazole. And the infections are generally treated for 1 to 3 days. In cases of heavy infestation, on the other hand, surgery may be necessary to remove worms and repair the damage they have caused. Intestinal blockage or holes, bile duct blockage, and appendicitis are complications that may require surgery. Now, the second one is trichoriasis caused by whipworm. It is an intestinal parasite and the name comes from the worm's whip-like shape. Additionally, it is the third most common roundworm of humans. Just like with ascariasis, this infection occurs in area where human feces are used as fertilizer or where defecation onto soil happens. So what happened in here is the worms are spread from person to person by fecal or oral transmission or through feces contaminated food. Again, those people infected with whipworm can suffer light or heavy infections. But those with heavy symptoms can experience abdominal pain and diarrhea or frequent painful passage of stool that contains a mixture of mucus, water, and blood. Heavy infection in children can also lead to severe anemia, growth retardation, and impaired cognitive development. This case also doesn't end here because for massive infection, chronic bloody diarrhea, tenesmus, rectal prolapse due to frequent attempts to defecate, especially in children, can also occur. The worms may sometimes be seen on the rectal mucosa when prolapsed, and they appear as grayish-white, which are 3 to 5 cm in length, in the shape of a whip, with a thickened body and a long thread-like extremity. So the good thing in here is whipworm infections are treatable with medication prescribed by the healthcare provider, and the treatment are again anthelmintic medication like albendazole and bebendazole for 3 days. The only difference is this time, iron supplements may also be prescribed if the infected person suffers from anemia. Then, hookworms are the next one. They live in the small intestine and the eggs are passed in the feces again of an infected person wherein they mature and hatch. So they release larvae or immature worms. In this case, the larvae mature into a form that can penetrate the skin of humans, which is why the infection is mainly acquired by walking barefoot on contaminated soil. So most people infected with hookworms have no symptoms, but some have gastrointestinal symptoms, especially those persons who are infected for the first time. Moreover, high-intensity hookworm infections occur among both school-aged children and adults. Unlike the soil-transmitted helminths, ascaris, and whipworm, so high-intensity infections with these worms are less common among adults. On the flip side, The most serious effects of hookworm infection are the development of anemia and protein deficiency caused by blood loss at the site of the intestinal attachment of the adult worms. So, when children are continuously infected by many worms, the loss of iron and protein can retard their growth and mental development. And again, the treatment for this infection is also anthelmintic medication. Finally, the last thing that we will tackle is enterobiosis caused by Enterobius vermicularis, which is a white slender nematode with a pointed tail that resides in the cecum, appendix, and ascending colon. Consequently, this infection is primarily a pediatric condition. That means children are the common hosts. For the parents' case, they are just typically infected via transmission through their children. The transmission also occurs through direct contact with contaminated furniture, bedclothes, bedding, towels, toilets, doorknobs, or other objects. Lastly, the parasite can also be transmitted during sexual contact. On top of that, it is reported that severe pinworm infection may be associated with an increased risk for appendicitis. Secondly, scratching the itchy area may cause eczema or a bacterial infection around the rectum. While in girls, pinworm infection can spread to the vagina and may cause vaginal discharge. Most importantly, Enterobius vermicularis can mimic other disease processes, and although rare, it can lead to serious infectious complications such as tubo-ovarian abscesses. Ultimately, the following complications have also been noted. These are appendicitis, endometritis, salpingitis, urethritis, urinary tract infection, and vulvovaginitis. To wrap it all up, anthelmintics such as mebendazole, parental pomote, and albendazole are active against Enterobius vermicularis. And that sums up today's lesson. I hope that you were able to learn something from this video. Again, I am MARGARETH VELARDE. See you on the next chapter. All of you did such wonderful tasks, guys. I am absolutely delighted that you listened to the topics well. I hope that each one of you will cherish our discussion and the topics by heart and by mind. Is that okay with you guys?
Yes po.
If so, that would be marvelously great. With that, let's come into conclusion and end our class with a quote saying, "Never stop learning because life never stops teaching." Thank you, have a great day, and keep safe.
Thank you po, Miss. Have a great day rin po.